On this channel, we've been looking at the different ways fandoms interact with media, as well as how our own interests intersect with that. So recently we've been playing Baldur's Gate 3, and obviously, we got thinking, what makes Baldur's Gate 3 so different? The game is great, but I wouldn't say it's more impactful than some of the other Game of the Year contenders, such as Tears of the Kingdom or Spider-Man 2. No, it's about the fans. I don't think Baldur's Gate 3 would have gone anywhere without its fans, or more specifically, women.
Women. What are they really? Some just say normal human beings, but look at this! That's not normal. Or is it?
It wouldn't be amiss to say that the way that women interact with media has often been sidelined or deemed as lesser. From the depiction of Star Trek /shippers being bored, horny housewives, to the contemporary shrill and intrusive idea of a fangirl. Fangirls are often seen as overly emotional and care more about the relationships and softer parts of shows, as opposed to the more manly activities of knowing every piece of information about the director's wife's gift card selling stall from 1953. And as is our main tenet on this channel, we believe that all forms of media interaction are inherently neutral or just outright good. These are both valuable ways to interact with a piece of media, and should be appreciated for the love that they are. Both are born of devotion and admiration, but what we do want to focus on is the more feminine side of things, because it really is often sidelined. So before we can analyze this feminine-masculine divide, let's actually get into what the differences are.
In general, men are analytical, whereas women are generally more transformative. There's wiggle room, and each person is unique, so take what we're saying as rough generalizations. We need to set some kind of baseline for us to analyze from, but warning, this is based on anecdotal evidence from people who've been chronically online for over a decade, and both of us don't really fit into this dichotomy that neatly either. We're here to look at trends, so inevitably, there'll be outliers, don't take it personally.
So men are analytical. They like to categorize and work within the rules that have been set out. What's the most optimal build? How fast can you get to this city? Who's stronger, Goku or Superman? Raw data. Raw data and logical consistency are king here. Speedrunning is a classically masculine activity. Not exclusively, but generally. It's a competition to see who can be the best. There's always a reason to keep on improving, because the competition will always find some new strategy or exploit. The audience for speedrunning is huge, but does it keep the game alive for the general audience? It's the same with the Pokemon competitive scene. People love playing and watching huge battles, but does it expand on the core experience for the average player? I don't think so. Not really. I've watched loads of really awesome challenge runs, but I probably never do one myself. Speedrunning and challenge runs are almost a spectator activity that is self-contained and doesn't necessarily even require knowing what the original game is. I'm sure most of us have watched a video explaining a speedrun for a video game we've never heard of. The fun here is in the skills on display, not so much a mutual enjoyment of the thing itself. Men want to be accurate and informative. Discussions tend to be within the framework of what exists and how it functions. Men also tend to be more focused on the overall plot as opposed to characters. Theories from a masculine point of view tend to focus on the events and their implications, and discuss characters as a whole, not as individuals. Adjacent to this is the idea of auteur theory. A singular creator is often platformed as being the key behind something being good or successful, which can then tie into the knowledge of facts being valued. For men, think power scaling, game guides, and theories. Men tend to dissect aspects of the property or catalog details and data. But what about the women? Women prefer transformative interpretations. There's a focus on the relationships between characters and how they affect each other, a more holistic approach to behaviors and plot beats. It's more about working with what you're given and adding to it. The show or game or whatever it may be is just a starting point for discussions and debate. Logic is absolutely a part of this, but it's more about being convincing and appealing to what people want to be true, as opposed to the outright logic within the show. Sometimes it would be fun, can be enough justification here. I would also say there's more of a collaborative nature and appreciation in these more feminine spaces. Building off of other people's ideas is normally allowed, and a back and forth between different disciplines like fan art and fanfiction is celebrated. Fanfiction is a massive subculture that would take several year-long documentaries to go into, but I think it's important to highlight how varied and passionate these communities are. It's very much a process of love, and it isn't easy to write good fanfiction either. Some fanfiction deals with elaborating on character relationships, while others may attempt to expand on canon events. It reminds me a lot of young children playing with dolls, smushing them together in new and interesting ways, and coming up with elaborate stories. is. It is human to create art, but I think it's very feminine to write 10,000 words about what would happen if you put Loki and Doctor Strange in a locked box, shook it up, and threw it in a river. Both these male and female approaches are just different ways of interpreting the source media text, and neither are better or worse, but the point of this video is to celebrate this more feminine interaction that often gets ignored or is outright derided.
So, what are the advantages?
Well, now we know what the feminine way of interacting with media is, why should we care? Well, let's start in the most pragmatic sense. As much as Cartoon Network may think girls don't buy toys, it's absolutely not men I see lining up at Comic-Con to buy merch. It just has to be the type of thing women want to buy. And that tends to be less action figures and more artwork and bishonen and bishoujo figures. Women will happily buy a whole manga series or clothing items in collaboration with something they like, but this is regularly overlooked as a viable market for some reason. It's not the 50s. Women have their own money and interests that can absolutely be exploited for capitalism. So why are a lot of things that cater to women so bland about it? I want cool things too, damn it. But the main advantage of women is the devotion to creating. Fanfiction and fanart exist to fill a gap, and by doing this keeps the fandom alive when the show or game itself is between seasons or even over entirely. This keeps the media alive, and maybe even thriving where it may have otherwise fallen to one side.
I actually have an anecdote for this. When I finished Fairy Tail as a teenager, I wanted more so badly. So when I stumbled upon these amazing comics of my favourite ship at the time, drawn by Buzzkin, I was drawn right back in. I subsided off purely reposts of these adorable comics for months. The moral of this story is, fan works like these keep the franchise alive between official releases. This is especially important in the current media landscape where it could be 3+ years between releases.
When something has a heavily female fanbase, it also tends to have a much larger online presence, which brings in new fans. I have a personal vendetta against websites like Netflix and Webtoon not letting you screenshot. I'm not trying to steal your content, I'm sending it to my friends to annoy them into also watching your shows. In the process of trying to protect their IP, they are instead stifling it. I could make the same argument for fan artists. A lot of fan art is technically IP theft, and it's tricky to decide on one side or the other. For larger companies, I feel it's negligible if an artist even makes a few grand off of your property, especially when no one would assume it's related to the original IP. But then I also remember when Among Us got popular and the developers had to ask people not to make merch because as a small company, they were trying to work on it themselves, and these fan creations were actually undercutting them. Most of the time I'd say it's a force for good, especially when it's small scale and operating in an entirely separate space like Artist Alley, or maybe there's some kind of transformative nature to the work that the original IP holders would just never have thought of. Some companies also expressly allow fan art, which I think is great, but it shouldn't be expected, because at the end of the day, I do think people have a right to their own IP and to protect it to some extent. It's just, how do you do this in a good way? I don't actually have an answer for this, because if you put a number on it, that can be avoided. For instance, if they say you can make up to £500, people could just then sell those products as free with another purchase. If it's a case of causing some kind of defamation, we get into violating the right to parody or criticize real quick. Maybe a lot of companies wouldn't like the things we say about anime, but this channel is absolutely transformative, and sending lawyers after small creators is ridiculous. We think about the ethics of art a lot. How can we make YouTube videos the most ethically? Someday we'd like to be able to pay for stock audio and video sites, or even be able to buy a camera and shoot pretty B-roll for us to use. Until then, the idea of transformative works is doing a lot of heavy lifting for us. But back to women and their advantages. There's also a tendency for women to talk about the things they like to other people. Again, this is a generalization, but I think the social elements of fandoms is incredibly feminine and communal, which allows word of mouth to spread quicker. Anecdotally, as soon as I find something I like, I'll try to show it to other people, because I want that social connection as part of the media experience. Currently, that is Mystery Quest, but it's a hard sell to get your friends to watch 20 hours of podcast. You guys should though. After this video, of course.
Men obviously do recommend and share the things they love too, but sharing and wanting others to enjoy the things you like is a fairly feminine trait. I feel like most of the other men I know aren't spending their evenings discussing the latest episode of Loki, or spending time going through tags to find fan edits, like me.
By targeting these feminine behaviors, a company could reasonably cultivate a dedicated fandom for their product, but it mostly seems to happen by accident. A lot of the shows known for their massive female audiences are also often criticized for their treatment of female characters or are actually just trying to appeal to men. Supernatural comes to mind, as its hypermasculinity was regularly interpreted as being gay-coded by its largely female audience. Another example is Haikyuu, a show clearly made to appeal to men with its standard shonen themes and almost no female characters, but it has an almost exclusively female fanbase. It's a show I only know about because of how much its female fanbase talks about it. For some reason, marketing executives will try to cash in on memes to appeal to fandoms, like The Last of Us and God of War's reaction gifs, which were cringe. There's a great video essay by Tomska that really breaks down the way companies try to emulate meme culture and often fail. A big part of that is just lack of knowledge. These people aren't part of the communities they're trying to appeal to, they don't know what they want, which is why these feminine approaches are ignored or avoided. I mean, they're not even paying attention to what they think is the core demographic, let alone outsiders. Of course there can be downsides to trying to cash in on this. Making the most popular fandom ship canon is often a disaster because no one can agree what that ship should be, and you're going to piss off half the fandom while giving the other half a superiority complex. All while making the show worse because all that setup was imagined in fanfiction and not textual at all. But appealing in some way, sometime, would be nice. I'd use Good Omens as a positive example, but the fact a lot of the Twitter advertising was done by marketing people and wasn't actually based on anything to do with Neil Gaiman due to the writer's strike just makes me a little dubious on it all. There were a lot of secret clues which just feel a little hollow knowing the main creator behind the show had nothing to do with it, but the attempt to connect with the fandom is still appreciated, and at least felt to have mostly good intentions. While we were at Comic-Con London, every single Good Omens cosplayer we saw was a woman, to really add to the thesis of this video. And you know, maybe a company can never engage with fandoms on these levels, because once it loses that freeform touch, once it becomes solid and real, it can no longer just be fandom, it just is part of the show now. But I still think they should try.
So how can you draw women into a space? Pretty boys! Well, not just pretty boys, but it helps. Complex characters with room to grow, deep friendships and scenarios, appeal to the focus on interesting relationships. Women love vampires and werewolves because of the implications. They are a fantastic springboard for your own imagination. Plus, they create inherent drama with other characters that may strain their relationships.
A larger cast is often too shallow, and lacks the time with the characters to build rapport, so you want a few but well-explored characters. Showing them in different scenarios is a good way to build on personality as well as relationships. A lot of the filler content that's hated by male shonen fans tends to be what the female fans are desperate for. As someone who uses Tumblr might say, I want to put that guy in situations and rotate him in my mind like a rotisserie chicken. The cast should also be varied. Don't give me 5 cardboard cutouts with abs drawn on. Add some dirt, some grime to their characters. Have them make mistakes or have personality flaws. And please, for the love of God, can we get some body shape variation for these men and women? As we're primarily an anime YouTube channel, let's have a look at some josei and shoujo to work out why there's such a huge female fanbase for these shows. Obviously, they're inherently trying to appeal to women, so what are some key features of this? Well, often but not always you'll have a female protagonist, which means a lot of the internal monologue of the show will follow a more feminine perspective. But there also tend to be more male secondary characters who are often love interests, so you get time with them, and there's variety at play. The themes also tend to be things that are more relatable to women. In shoujo, this will be teenage relationship drama, struggling with self-confidence, and finding your place in the world. Josei also has these, but will also touch on more mature feminine themes such as sex, pregnancy, and social standards of beauty. Shoujo and josei also tend to have a lot more interpersonal drama, allowing the viewer to really dive into the personalities of these characters. The settings for shoujo and josei are pretty varied, but in general they tend to be more based in reality than shonen. This doesn't mean there aren't fantasy shows or shows with fantasy elements, but the focus is more on social aspects of life, and this lends itself towards more simpler relatable settings, such as a school or workplace.
The perfect media franchise to appeal to women would be one with a small cast of characters, let's say 5 to 6, each with their own interesting backstories and character dynamics. Look at any cast of a reverse harem for the archetypes. You want the pretty boy, the mysterious one, the cool outgoing one, the shy one, and the older one at bare minimum. Each of those should be distinct, preferably with sad backstories and some kind of power that puts them at odds with another member of the group. The setting should be realistic and down to earth, but you could still have fantasy elements or be set in a fantastical world, just more low fantasy, with interpersonal politics. tropes. Think the trend of otome game isekai. They don't all have to be boys, but the pretty boy and the mysterious boy are a must if you want to appeal to the widest range of people. A cute mascot character won't hurt either. Also, you should add in a DILF or MILF, but that's just my opinion. The ageism at play is a whole nother axis we could go into, but let's just stick to gender for now.
Companies need to stop targeting a wide audience and start targeting specific audiences. Just like your average man won't engage in fandom nerdy activities, your average woman won't either. That's why you need to target the nerds. The nerds who will buy all your collectibles, the ones who will write the fanfiction and draw the fan art. You want to target your properties to the ones who will really love them. And if you want your thing to grow above and beyond its base identity, you need those nerdy women. This is borderline mandatory. Captain Marvel may have been popular with a general audience, but the nerds don't like her that much. Men and women alike. So Captain Marvel is now often left out of the general consciousness. Despite making $1 billion and having a new movie out, you rarely see anything about her in these online spaces. Of course, superhero fatigue is somewhat to blame in this specific case, but I really don't see anyone who cares about this film. No one shares gift sets, or funny lines, or fan art. All that rage baiting around the film's release did very little to create anything substantial for a long-term fan base. I think big companies should try to move away from this mass market appeal that creates one-off hits that dissolve into nothing, and try to make more niche content, make it cheaper, take longer, and just expect that it might not do as well as the last thing. Another mistake I see companies make is thinking women are only drawn to media because of women. As you mentioned earlier, the franchises women love the most are the ones with pretty boys. Just look at Hetalia as an example. I'm sure there are male fans of the show, but they're lost in the sea of horny nerdy women. Despite the phrase sex sells, it feels like no one's really appealing to sexuality in the West. It is there in pieces, but you don't get many shows that are outright fan service. Of course we went into that a little more in our fan service video, but in terms of developing fandoms, it's very applicable. There is a lack of media that appeals to baser desires outside of porn, and not just in terms of sex itself, but atypical interests too. You can create an immediate pull by appealing to this, especially when nothing else does. Look at the odd frequency of mafia erotica aimed at women. Why is no one appealing to these women by creating TV shows or games where you get to see a hot mafia guy be protective and dangerous? There's clearly a market for it. The lack of sex in 18 rated games is another thing that I don't understand, or just the existence of 18+ games in general that aren't wholly about sex. I want to plow the cute romanceable characters and then plow my fields for spring. The presence of sex tends to be seen as inherently cheapening to a piece of media and is often derided. As with any theme, it can be done badly, but how are we supposed to do it well when it's barely being done at all? What about God of War is actually 18+? Blood and swearing? Really? That's it? Of course sex isn't something you have to put in, but I do wish people would question why violence is so much more prevalent than sex, and the way sex is seen as so undervalued as part of fiction. The popularity of Baldur's Gate 3 really shows how much people want this, so it'll be interesting to see if the industry responds to this. Unless they're busy laying off another few thousand people, of course.
Nerds tend to consume a lot of media, and as a result, have an eye for quality. Be in cinematography or writing, the first thing I noticed about Peaky Blinders and The Cleaner was how stunning the cinematography was. Nerds just be like that. And you need to be focused on quality. Those pretty boys you're already designing for your next TV show, they need to be well written. Appeal to the want for community by encouraging an environment of discussion. Any show that is inherently interesting will do this by the nature of its existence, but there are certain attributes that can help. For TV shows, weekly episodes provide space and time to fill with discussion, as well as develop theories that turn into transformative works. If it's a video game, branching choices will inherently create a variety of experiences needed to spur debate. Sometimes this debate might be picking a romance option, or it could lean into the ethics and wider social issues. For all media, some kind of cliffhanger or unanswered plot thread is a great way to leave the door open to imagination. And just because it's not answered yet doesn't mean it needs to be. Sometimes a story is helped by our imaginations filling in some details just a little bit. Great character design can help encourage fan art. This is more specific to games and animation where you have full control over the design of a character, but good costuming and coherent style is great for live action media. Good Omens is a great example of this. Crowley and Aziraphale have personal styles that are easy for fans to emulate through cosplay, as well as a few key outfits that are easy to latch onto as recognizable. Designs that are easy to recognize have more potential to have organic growth online because people can identify it without the need for hashtags or descriptions. This is something I noticed particularly with Baldur's Gate 3, where a lot of the fan art I saw had limited descriptions but was still shared at the same rate. Although a few times I did accidentally hit like on similar characters, but that was more because of the artist's style and less about poor character design. All of this also pushes collaboration as people build off each other's ideas. Seeing a fan art of a meme, and then a joke under that fan art, and then the joke inspires someone else to make a different piece of fan art, and then that piece of art inspires a cosplayer. It's basically a whole ecosystem, a constant conversation through art.
What tends to ruin our neat little boxes are sexual orientation and neurodivergency. Oh shit, maybe that's why they don't fit us. As crazy as it might sound, when you're different from the norm, you behave differently than expected. A show about pretty boy vampires who'll fight each other over you won't do much for a woman who's only interested in women, but it might do great with gay men. Similarly, if you're bisexual, a show with a more balanced cast is going to be more appealing, or a game that allows you to romance both men and women. For all sexualities, representation of any type can be part of the appeal, but I feel for most it can't be the only thing you have going on. I've definitely been let down by the promise of representation, only for the actual show to be awful or boring, or the representation to just be an outright lie. Then you have various neurodiversities. A woman with autism might find a stereotypical female character more unrelatable, and so be more drawn to masculine or male characters. And vice versa. For other types of neurodiversity like anxiety or ADHD, the draw to characters more like them could override typical gender biases. And of course this could play with non-gender based forms of interaction. Someone with ADHD might be more drawn to a show that can just provide that hit of dopamine, regardless of content, or want a piece of media they can control their consumption of, like a video game. We're actually working on a separate video about how identity can change how you interact with media, so if you want to be a part of that, feel free to check out the Google form in the description. But this video is specifically about the value women have. So let's round this video off. Women are a powerful force. Don't let your sexism stop you from taking advantage and making things for this huge untapped market. This doesn't just apply to big companies, but small ones too. If you run a business, consider what markets you may be overlooking and how you could try to appeal to them the best you can. Don't just assume you understand what demographic your core audience is. Maybe there's some subculture or overlap with your work you could aim towards.
As we've mentioned a few times throughout this video, everything we've talked about is in general. Everyone is a unique individual. Yes! We're all individuals! These are just trends that we've noticed in our time existing on the internet and analyzing media reception and performance. We get drunk and overanalyze the performance of our favorite YouTube channels, guys. You might be different than the boxes we've laid out, but how cool would it be if there was a wider variety of media for a wider variety of people? But what do you think? Let us know down in the comments. All of our videos are just conversations we've had and want to expand upon and share. If you want to join in with our madness, check out our Patreon for early access videos and other exclusive content. Wait, 0? Jacob, no! I guess we're back down to 0 on Patreon. Thank you so much to all the artists that let us use their work throughout our video. If you enjoyed, hit like and subscribe now for the infamous question that may or may not be relevant to an upcoming video. Where did you first watch anime? Was it on TV? Netflix, or even those illegal streaming sites your friend linked you to when you were 14. And as always, thanks for watching. Bye!